I am Kalyan Krishnan. I'm a program manager in the Azure Active Directory or Microsoft Identity Platform team, and I work with developers who are integrating their solutions with our platform and Microsoft Graph. As this particular session is essentially an updated session that I did in 2018 around security groups and app roles. We have made a lot of additions in this area since that time, and I wanted to cover those. So here we are in a newer session. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. So this is a very 30,000 feet view of what we are going to do there here in this session. We will basically discuss authorization briefly, and then we will just go on and start discussing the various options in detail. There are a few prerequisites that I want to call out. If you are a developer who is just starting our platform, you might find that some of these topics are not as detailed as you would like them to be, because we are sort of assuming that you are familiar with, in general, integrating applications with Azure Active Directory. And in more detail, you are familiar with what web applications that sign in users and web APIs that authorize using access tokens are, and you know how they work in general. There is a huge topic that we have for developers that is the permissions and consent framework. Working understanding of that is also required. And finally, in this particular session, I only cover modern apps. What I mean by that is that these are applications that are using the OpenID OAuth protocol. Two of the features covered are also available to what we call as legacy apps or applications that are using the SAML protocol or some of the other older integration authentication options that are available in Azure Active Directory. But I'm pretty sure that if you go through this, you will find them useful even for applications that do not necessarily use the modern protocol to authenticate with Azure Active Directory today. Just a very, very brief discussion on what authorization is. It's hard to explain authorization unless you explain authentication. Authentication is essentially a process of proving who you are. We basically short it to authn. And once you know who you are, once you know who you are, you can move on to essentially authorization, which is more about what you can do. So they go hand in hand. Usually authorization is always follows authentication, and which is same for our platform as well. I said a very brief explanation of what authorization is with respect to authentication. I understand that there are a lot of other scenarios where you could run into a scenario where authorization still might have to work in terms of without an authentication. But in terms of when we approach the Microsoft Identity Platform as a developer, our model is built as such that authorization always precedes authentication. One very important thing that I like to call out is that you do not have to rely on features that are provided by by our platform to implement authorization. More often than not, applications, depending upon their business needs, would have their own custom implementation of their authorization stacks, and it is perfectly okay to have one which fits your business needs. This session is more about learning the features that are available and use them if you need them effectively. The features that we will be covering here in more detail are essentially app roles. I will start with app roles that you assign to users, followed by app roles that are assigned to apps, which are actually known as application permissions in our platform. Then I'll move on to security groups. We would first cover how to get security groups in your tokens. We will discuss a new feature that we started supporting, which is nested group memberships. We would also cover application groups, which is the most wanted feature for a very long time, which is essentially how to limit the groups that an application works with and gets in their token. The one question that we often get asked, and which is, what is Microsoft's guidance on using one or more of these? And as I had explained earlier, these features are not meant to be used mutually exclusively. You can use one or more depending on what your needs are. Some of these are required. So for example, if you are integrating a web application that signs in users, you have to declare a minimum of one scope. If you have ever worked with integrated a web application and which assigns users to various roles, then you have used two of these features already. Now, the goal of this exercise is to basically make you aware of the options available in detail and let you choose which ones you want to use according to your needs. Okay, it is perfectly okay to use one or more of them to get an even finer level of control or have a different behavior depending upon if you have applications signing as themselves versus applications that sign in users. So it's never a question about what you should, what should I use? Our recommendation is that you should learn and pick and choose what suits best for you. With that, I will move to the first topic, which is app roles. App roles have been around for a very long time. App roles are used to assign permissions to both users and applications. The one very specific thing about app roles is that an app role is something that is very specific to the apps themselves. Is in comparison to some of the other features that we will discuss, like security groups and directory roles, which are not really specific to an app, but more specific to an AAD tenant themselves. If you have authorization specific needs that are scoped to an application, app roles are the best thing to go because they will go away the moment an application is removed, deleted from the AAD registration. The app roles, once declared, assigned, and granted, will be provided to the developers in the roles claim and of the ID and access tokens. And finally, how does it work? If you want to work with an app roles, usually the steps are like this. You would define app roles in your application's manifest. Then you assign roles or users to or applications to these roles that you have defined in your app registration. You would receive them in the roles claim as explained earlier. So finally, let's talk about the two types of app roles that are available to you. The first one is the app roles that you assign to users. This is probably the most popular option that we have seen developers use and in our platform. And let's talk about them now. App roles for users. The app roles that are defined for users are the ones that will assign to users in a tenant. They're not cross-tenant. And once the definition and assignment are taken care of, developers would basically have code in their applications that take actions according to the app roles that user signing in presents in their tokens. The user assignments is usually done by members of the IT team. One of the important features of app roles is that the definition of app roles versus assignments are usually carried out by different people. The app roles for users will only be present if the user signs in. If you have app roles which are assigned to applications, they would not be present necessarily. And I have mentioned earlier, it's arguably one of the most popular mechanisms for role-based authorization in AAD. We see that this being used by hundreds of thousands of applications in AAD today. So let's go and cover what they are and how to use them. The first step that you do when you want to declare an app role that is to be used by users is to basically declare them in your manifest. So usually you go to your manifest, you will go to the app roles attribute and declare an app role. So in this example here, I'm declaring two. One is called directory viewers and another one is called user readers. The thing that stands out here is that it has an attribute called allowed member types. If you want users to be assigned to your app roles, you should use user there. We will cover the app roles assigned to application, which uses a different value in a few minutes. The ID, which is a GUID, has to be generated by you, and please make sure that if when you are declaring one that you generate a new one using a free tool of some sorts yourself. Once you have defined your app roles, you would essentially in the AAD portal, if they are ready for you to use. If so, to assign users to these app roles, You would go to the overview of your app registration, click on Manage Application link on the right to navigate to the service principal of your app, which will be available in the Enterprise Applications blade. Then you would click Assign Users and Groups to get a screen where you can start assigning users to your role. This is a screen that is used to assign users or groups to your application. When we say assignment, this is what we actually mean. So not only you want to assign users to your applications, you also want to assign them to a certain app role. To do that, you still click on the Add User screen. You will select the various users and groups that you want to assign to a certain role. And then you would be presented with the various roles that you had declared. And you can choose one of them and finish up the assignment. Now, in this particular set of screenshots, what I have shown you is that the assignments are done. In the assignments, I have assigned both individual users and groups. Just be aware that assignment of groups to app roles is not available in the Azure AD free edition, and it sometimes comes to surprise folks. You need to have at least Azure AD Premium P1 to be able to assign groups to app roles. Once your assignment is done, the one important thing that developers forget is that you need to switch on a flag called user assignment required. The reason why this is needed is that an application in an Azure AD tenant by default will sign in any user that is present in that tenant, including guest users. Now, to make sure that the users signing in have the app roles that have been assigned to them, you have to basically ensure that only assigned users, the ones that you worked with in the previous set of screens, are actually able to sign in. For that, you need to switch on the user assignment required flag to ensure that all other users in the tenant are not able to sign in, and thus your application can work with the certainty that all the users who are signing in and presenting themselves to your app have the app roles available in their tokens as well. The roles, if you know how to look into a token, they would be available in a claim called roles. And in this case, the user is a member of the directory viewer stores, directory viewers role, and thus their token actually has that available here. So the couple of slides here that I have provided, which for ASP.NET developers who are very familiar with the authorize attribute and the new authorization policy that has been that is being promoted by the ASP.NET Core team. So the ASP.NET Core middleware has the ability to process these roles in the token automatically. You don't have to do anything for it. If you are in your startup.auth, you would simply put the role claim type as roles. And in your controllers and elsewhere, you can continue to use your authorize attributes as you have been using. The middleware takes care of actually getting the roles from a token and then making it available for your code. Similar code on how to use it for ASP.NET Core is also provided in this slide here. I will not cover it in details. You can use this and other links that are provided in various samples to learn more about how to use it in ASP.NET. For other languages, you might have to look into similar mechanisms that might be available to process claims from the tokens that are presented to an application after a user has signed in. To finish the app roles, just a few more things to take care of. You make sure that you have the user assignment required flag set to ensure that you only sign in users who have been assigned roles. The point that I had covered, that groups assigning security groups to app roles, which is a very good way to ensure that you don't have to work with individual users. If you are in a tenant which has hundreds of thousands of them, it's not available in the free edition of Azure Active Directory. I have provided links to a couple of documentation pages that would let you explore this feature in more detail, including how to assign users. And if you want to cover, get more details around it, please use the sample provided to learn about them. I will now move on to the next one, which is to basically walk through what's called as app roles for apps, or they're better known as application permissions. Not as popular, but it's more of a conceptual item here. A lot of you have worked with app permissions, but the questions are always around how does it all come together? So I will just walk through it, what it is, how it comes together, and it's a very different functionality in terms of how you have worked and with app roles for users, and you will see that stand out when I go finish this up. So moving on, app roles for applications. These are roles, app roles that you assign to apps in a tenant. These are integrated with consent framework, or you know them as application permissions that applications or resources, as we call them, are in the identity platform expose them. The assignments or consent to application permissions can only be done via admin consent today. You cannot have users assigned by other folks like you do for app roles for users. It allows applications that do not necessarily sign in users to be assigned a number of roles that can be used to further implement fine-grained authorization on a resource like a web API. The best examples for app roles for applications is Microsoft Graph. If you have ever worked with them, you have clicked on this app. You might have clicked on this applications permissions tab a number of times and have seen that there are various app permissions or app roles declared here for you to use and grant admin consent to before you can call a number of APIs that expect these to be present in the token. Very good example. If you want to explore this in detail, I always ask the developer to study how Microsoft Graph has done it, because it will open up it explains a lot of things on how you want to design your various application roles and scopes, which I'll cover later for you in your own applications and services. The process to declare an app roles for app is more or less similar to how you do it for users, except that you go to the manifest, you declare the JSON, except in this case, you will use the allowed member types to be application. Once you have done so, you will basically start assigning those by actually going to a client application that needs these permissions. So in this case, the permission was, so the application where you are declaring these is the API. And then you would go to the client application, which is a different application. You will say, I need to add a permission. Locate the API where you have declared the application permission. Once you have selected it, and you will do a admin consent. And after that, once the client application obtains an access token for this API, this is the format that you need to use in AAD v2, which is to basically append a .default at the end of the scope request. Once you do this, you would get the roles or the app permissions in the roles claim as well. The important bit here is that you need an admin consent to assign roles to app, and you cannot ask for individual app roles today, simply because the way Azure AD is built in, the consent happens once for all the app roles that are requested, and you would always get, using default, the roles that were admin consented successfully in a tenant. So do not assume that you will get all the roles that are declared, and this is how APIs are able to expose app roles and let the client applications use them. This is how you have been, if you are a frequent user of Microsoft Graph, this is how you have been using it for a very long time, except that you might not know how it all works internally. If you, in your API, you can use whatever way you want to verify the app roles that your API receives. So for example, in this case, I am using the authorize attribute again on my web API's controller to control access to certain API calls depending upon which roles the client application has been assigned to and admin consented to in a tenant. Yep, yes, the app roles for application use app roles to let applications request granular permission. Learn from Microsoft Graph, the best example out there. They will be available to you once the administrator consents. There is a scenario documentation and sample that we have listed out here for those of you who want to explore application permissions in more detail. I will move on to the next topic, which is security groups. Quick overview of security groups. It's a collection of users assigned to a group. You would assign rights to security groups. The security groups in AAD could be created and maintained on the Azure AD or on cloud themselves, but a very popular option also is security groups that are synced from on-premise. Those are very peculiar item here in a ways because we will be discussing a lot of features that are only available to security groups that are synced from an on-prem AD to the Azure Active Directory. Thus I wanted to call them out. Security groups are not like app roles. They're not tied to an application. They are used for a number of other activities like conditional access and other features to assign various features and functionalities to a group of users automatically. Security groups are not something, memberships are not something that developers would usually manage. They are done at a different level, usually by the IT staff or a group owner. You, as a developer, you can code for a group permissions if you know it to be available for sure. You would enable the groups claim in your application registration portal, and then you can either use the group IDs or the group names that travel to your application in a token to implement whatever authorization decisions that you want to make. So how do you go and enable your applications to receive group claims? You would click on token configuration. You will find a button called add groups claim. And once you click on that, you will see a lot of options available to you. To get groups in your token, you will choose security groups. It has various options. If you click on just security groups, you will get all the nested group memberships as well. The other features that are also available are directory roles, or if it makes sense to you, you can choose an option called all groups, which will also give you all the distribution lists that are available in a tenant. And it will also give you directory roles, which are basically built-in roles that users are assigned to in an Azure AD tenant. The final and the most important bit that we finally brought up is the groups assigned to an application. Instead of getting a list of all the groups that a user can possibly be assigned to, which usually runs into hundreds and often cause a problem called a token token overage, you can choose which groups your application wants to work with. And only if the signing in user is member of one of the groups that you have listed would they be made available in the token that your application receives. So going forward, this is how typically groups claim looks in an Azure AD token. But just note that unless you are working with on-premise groups, you cannot get groups name today. So if the group is not maintained or not synced from an on-premise AD using AD Connect, we have an option called SAM account name available, which allows you to get the names instead of group IDs. So in the token. So for example, once I have made this selection, in my groups claim, I'm getting the actual names of groups, which to be very specific, it's the SAM account name attribute of a group in my claims. There are some other options that are also available for you that you can use to set the format and how you need to receive the groups claims. I have provided these as options here. I'm not going to cover each one of them in detail, but if you can use the links provided in the doc, you can actually pursue them in your own time, the more detailed features. So finally, just remember that when it comes to group claims, the features differ between groups that are maintained on-prem versus the ones which are synced from on-prem versus the ones that are cloud only. There is support for nesting groups today. If you choose security groups, you will get all the nested groups. I will cover the nested groups in a little bit more detail here. So this is an example of nested groups that exists in on-prem AD. So because in Azure AD Cloud only, you cannot do nested groups today. So the nested groups membership that you will get in your tokens would be nested groups from groups that are synced from on-prem AD. So this is one example of nesting that I had created. If you are not asking for SAM account names, you will get the group IDs of the nested groups. If you choose one of the options which allows you to get a group name like SAM admin, SAM account name, then you will get the group names of the nested group memberships as well. As I mentioned, it only works on-prem today. The next topic that I will cover is called application groups. It's unfortunately not available for application groups today, but we are working on it and hope to make it available soon. Again, the second last item on the groups is application groups that we have recently launched early this year. This allows you to just work with groups that your application cares about. The problem is that instead of getting all the groups that are assigned to a signed-in user, you only get the groups that you care about, you have listed in the portal, and the Azure AD will make sure that the list is filtered for you. It's not available in Azure AD Free Edition. You need to have an Azure AD Premium P1 to be able to use it. It helps you to avoid or program for token overage scenarios. The user assignment required flag is still advised in case of application groups because it will ensure that you do not sign in users which are not assigned to one of those groups that you want to work with. Otherwise, you might get some inconsistent results. We were not able to build the nested groups functionality in application groups around its release, but it's something that we are actively pursuing and hope to have it available sometime late this year. How do you configure your applications to use these group filtering? You would choose the fourth option, which is called groups assigned to an application. And once you do that, you would also need to go and assign groups to your app. So to do that, you would go back to the overview of your app registration, and you would click on the managed application to get to the your application service principal. Choose assign users and groups. When you go there, you select the groups that you want to work with. Now, just be careful here because this is the same screen that you use to assign roles to your users and groups as well. But in this case, we are asking you to select groups directly. The moment you do that, Azure AD, in this case, I've only selected just the groups that are available. The moment you do that, the number of groups that you have listed here or selected here would be taken into account during a user signing in to ensure that instead of getting all the groups, you will only get groups claim if the user belongs to one of these three groups. So again, if the token looks the same, it's just the way it gets filtered earlier. Yes, you can get the group names as well if you have on-premise groups. And in this case, instead of getting all the groups, you will just get the groups that you had chosen in the add users and groups screen on your app's service principal. So I'll just finish up the conversation here by simply, so in the deck, you have a few more references that you can links to various other topics and recordings and sessions that are pertinent to the topics that we covered today. Thank you. That's all I had for you folks today.